What is up, guys? This is Tcg Sam here, and in today's video, I'm going to be doing a meta tier list for what I think the top meta decks are going to be after the March 2021 ban list. So without any further ado, let's just hop straight into it. So the first deck is going to be ABCs. So they lost Union Care, which actually for the deck is really huge because it allowed them to play around Ibiru with the Galaxy Soldier combo, and it also allowed them to just set up more plays with a the level 5 Union monster if they needed to. Losing it really hurt the consistency, I think, because the deck already struggled a bit with consistency, having only, I would say, really 7 really good starters in Union Hanger, Terraforming, and Unauthorized Reactivation. I think it's going to be a tier 2 deck at best. It's just Union Care hurt this deck so much. It prevented them from being able to search that Galaxy Soldier. I mean, yes, they can still play Galaxy Soldier, but you have to hard draw it now, which honestly doesn't seem that good. And to be honest, I just feel like it's probably tier 2 at best because the Union Carrier hit just took away so much consistency from the deck. But next deck is going to be Invoke variants like Invoke Dogmatica, Invoke Chadals, stuff like, well, not Invoke Chadals, but like Invoke Dogmaticas and other Invoke variants. I also think Invoke's kind of a tier 2 deck. Invoke just isn't like has just never been like super great these past formats to where they're like tier 1. They're always decent, especially with the Dogmatica cards. They work really well together, but even then I still feel like their power isn't high enough to compete with some of the other decks on the tier list, even though they're still a very like decent deck. They're definitely not bad, and they're a decent control deck, but I just feel like other control decks do the controlling aspect a little better than Invoke does. Next up is Adamancipator. I'm probably a little biased here, but I personally think it's tier 1.5 because I really like these type of combo decks. I like Adamancipators because they are able to play. They have room for hand traps first of all, which I still think is gonna be really important in this format because of Dragon Link. But other than that, like the boards, they can put up some pretty nice boards too with like Appaloosa, Savage, Dragoon if they choose to play stuff like that. But even then, like it can play through boards as well decently well. And I just feel like as a combo deck, it just has the potential to beat out some of those control decks in the format because of how much gas it can go through every single turn. I just feel like this deck is pretty good. Next up is Prank Kids. Prank Kids is interesting because we haven't really been seeing much of it in the meta. Although like the cards themselves really aren't too terrible. Like they're really good. They have pretty much 15 1-card starters, which is really nice. But the thing is, the problem with this deck is that like all they're putting up is just the double Raigeki. Although if you play it more like a control deck, it's really not that bad, I suppose, because you're able to play a bunch of hand traps. You can play cards like Mystic Mine if you really wanted to. But even then, I just feel like Prank Kids still tier 2 because unfortunately, the way I understand it, it still loses to cards like Ash and Meister on their a singular hand trap, which is a big problem for it. Although the deck obviously is not bad at all. Next up is kind of Buster Blader / Eldish / Dogmatica pile, like that specific 60 card deck where they just mash a bunch of engines together. I think it's still really good. The Buster Lock is pretty good against Dragon Link, considering all their monsters are dragons to begin with. So even if you just bring out the one part of I believe the fusion monster, it just like prevents them from actually being able to do anything at all. So in a way, it kind of indirectly counters what I think is going to be one of the top meta decks, being Dragon Links. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in like low tier 1.5. It also has access to a lot of really powerful engines like Dogmatica and stuff. It's just that I feel like this card has a lot better starters than something like Invoke Dogmatica. I feel like the starters in this deck do more. And it has definitely more power in my opinion. Next up is Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs, I mean, they weren't touched and they're still really good. I think you just have to measure Dinosaurs up against the other combo decks, because against control decks, I would say Dinosaurs struggles a little bit playing around back row, but against other combo decks, it should be able to gobble up most of them, to be honest. In my opinion, it's like very high tier 1.5, bordering on tier 1. I would say it's very close to becoming one of the like forefront, going to the forefront of the meta. But obviously it wasn't touched. It's still really, really good. I just feel like some of the other meta decks are just slightly outclassed a little bit because it still lacks, I think, a little bit in the consistency department, even though it has access to prosperity now. But I still feel like dinosaurs, like, very high tier 1.5. Shaddolls, same thing as dinosaurs. Shaddolls were played a lot last format. This format, I think, after VFD leaves and after Drytron's got a hit to their consistency, I feel like Shaddolls, they did really well against those decks because they had a card like Ariel to help them out. Even though Ariel's a little less effective now, it's still really good against the top decks, which I still think Virtual World and Dragon Link are still going to be up there. Maybe even Drytron. So in a way, like, it hasn't really changed much for the Shaddol deck. The Shaddol deck, though, has really, really good matchups against control back row decks like Eldish, because Ariel does a lot to that deck as well. But Shaddolls can also play a bunch of traps if you choose to go that route, making it really, really good to grind with the control decks, but also stop the meta decks in its tracks. And now I think Winda becomes a little better because Dragon Link struggles a little more to out a card like Winda than something like Virtual World did. So it's definitely a tier 1.5 deck, very close to tier 1 in my opinion. Next up, Cyber Dragon. I just haven't been seeing this deck in the meta at all. I'm gonna put it in like the rogue / other category. I mean, they have decent cards. Like, a lot of their starters are really, really good. Cyber Dragon Core, Cyber Emergency are just really, really good cards. But like, other than those, I mean, I'm not sure what else the deck can really do. I mean, going second, possibly it's pretty decent. Going first, if you play a trap variant, it's possibly okay. But I just feel like they're better control decks if you want to go that route. And they're just better combo decks if you want to go that route too. So I just feel like Cyber Dragons are just kind of a rogue deck right now. Burning Abyss. I think Burning Abyss is really, really good. I would definitely put it in tier 1.5. Burning Abyss, every single, like, it's a super consistent deck because pretty much any two monsters gets you into the your most central part of your deck, pretty much being setting up resources with Dante. But not only that, any two monsters in your deck becomes AA Zeus with 2 Sens, which is just absolutely incredible. Because we all know how powerful Divine Thunder Arsenal AA Zeus is. The fact that the deck can just pretty much make it like every single hand to break boards is just absolutely insane. Plus the incredible grind game it has with cards like Graph and Seer. Honestly, I just think it can definitely compete with a lot of the top decks right now. So I would not be sleeping on this deck. I definitely think it's tier 1.5. Math Mech. Next up is Math Mech. Math Mech is interesting because it has a lot of access to a lot of good cyber support with like Silent Mining. Cyber's as a monster type probably has one of the best supports in the game, and I think the fact that Math Mech can use all the cyber extra deck monsters like Cyber's Wicked, Splash Mage, stuff like that, those are really, really good extra deck monsters. And just for that reason alone, like, I just put them in like tier 2. Like, as the deck as a whole is not terrible either. Well, honestly, I don't think it's that great. I'm not really sure what the deck can really do to build. Like, they have access to the trap, which is really nice, where they make the 3 material XYZ monster that like disrupts you on your turn, which is pretty decent, honestly. But even then, I still feel like it's probably like a mid tier 2 to high tier 2 at best, in my opinion. Next up, True Draco. This deck sucks. I don't think bringing back True King's Return to 3 just did anything, especially now that it still have 1 Dynamite, like, and 1 Diagram. Those are probably like the only good cards in the, pretty much the few good cards in the deck. So until those come back, like, I'm pretty sure it's still definitely a rogue deck. Next up, I actually have a specific card, that being Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. And I'm just gonna put it in tier 1 because I just feel like I wanted to express how I felt like this card pretty much is gonna take over a big part of the meta. A lot of the decks probably are gonna be splashing this into their deck now, just because of how powerful this card is. With a card like VFD gone, this is probably the next card that a lot of decks are gonna be trying to go for, just because of how oppressive it is. It's really, really good. It absolutely just kind of destroys rogue decks because they just have no outs to it. Even against the top meta decks, they may struggle to out it sometimes. So Dragoon is just a really, really good card, and I think for that reason, the card alone just deserves to be in tier 1. Next up, speaking of tier 1, Zodiacs. So I think the Zodiac engine, just the engine as a whole, like, it's just so powerful because it's so splashable. It gives you access to cards like Trident and Zeus, most importantly Zeus, and you can make Zeus with 6 materials, which is just really powerful because you're pretty much just breaking through any board with the Zeus at that point. And I wouldn't say the pure Zodiac deck as a pure deck is really that good, but as an engine, it's just super powerful in my opinion. Being able to splash cards like Dogmatic and Eldish also make it really powerful. And for that reason, I'm just going to put it in tier 1. I just really think this is a really good engine. Next up is Drytron. So this is probably where it gets interesting. Because they actually didn't lose any, I would say, of their actual plays. They just lost a lot of consistency with the hitting of Union Carrier and Ben 10. So I've seen a lot of Drytron builds online trying to go to cards like Siberia Angel Idaten right now. And the card that searches like a ritual, adds a ritual spell when it's summoned. And you can play like cards like the Megaliths as well in there, which I think is probably going to be mandatory if you're going to try to play the deck now. Drytrons as a deck now just is a really good engine for a ritual-based strategy. And ritual-based strategies have some of the best kind of support cards that a lot, like Preparation Rites, Pre-Preparation Rites, in theory are all +1s. Like, it's just kind of crazy how a lot of their cards are just +1s. But even, Drytrons, I feel like they didn't lose any of their power plays. They just lost some of their consistency. For that reason, I'm going to put them in high tier 1.5. I still think they're going to be really competitive. People are going to find ways to adapt to the deck. You can throw in a card like Dragoon as well to supplement your end board in addition to something like Herald. So that's just really good. Next up is Dogmatica and Dogmatica variants. Definitely tier 1.5. Dogmatica cards are still probably a lot better now because the 2 of the top combo decks got knocked down on Peg, so it helps control decks really rise to the forefront of the meta with the engine. The engine is just so generic and so powerful. There's not really much I have to say about it. I just think it adds a very nice consistency boost to your deck and gives it quite a bit of power as well. Next up, Eldish. I would say it's like low tier 1, high tier 1.5 in my opinion. Bordering on tier 1 though because of its incredible grind game with all its traps and stuff and how splashable it is. You can splash it with something like Zeus, Dogmatica, Invoked, all that stuff. For that reason, I'm going to put it in tier 1. It didn't get hit at all, and I just feel like it's just really good. If it was able to stand its ground against something like Virtual Worlds, then it can definitely compete in this meta. Next up is the Bird Up. I think people are calling it Bird Up or something. It's the Tri-Brigade Lyralist deck where they used like the Tri-Brigade monsters and the Lyralist monsters to end on some more Bird of Sovereignty and use a card like the Wind Barrier statue. It's definitely a really powerful combo deck in my opinion. Personally, I'm not too sure what the deck actually does, but from what I understand, it's definitely pretty good. Being able to put up kind of a Vanity's Emptiness and protect it with a card like Linkuriboh as well, that's something the deck does very well. The only problem with this deck, I feel like, is it probably lacks a little consistency in my opinion, but if like I could be completely wrong about this. I haven't played the deck. I'll just straight up say I haven't played the deck. I've only seen it work a couple of times, but if it works really well. So I'm gonna put it in tier 1.5 for that reason. Next up is Subterra Dragoon, specifically the Dragoon build, because without it, I just feel like Subterras just suck. But with Dragoon, I'd say it catapults itself into tier 2, just because of how powerful a card like Dragoon is. Backing it up with a bunch of traps, like your opponent's probably not going to be able to win at that point. But yeah, that's the other problem with the deck. Aside from Dragoon as its power play, it's probably very difficult for the deck to play into an established board. And for that reason, I just feel like it's just really tier 2 at best. It's really getting hard carried by its Floodgates and Dragoon with this, honestly. I mean, I guess another good thing about it, you can play a card like Dimension Shifter in the main deck, but other than that, I just feel like it's not that great. Next up is Virtual World, interestingly enough. And I actually think Virtual World is still a low tier 1 deck. Because Virtual Worlds, they didn't lose any of their main deck consistency, because you could see that the fact that they make 2 rank 9s is pretty good. And the reason why it was so powerful is because a card like VFD was just inherently unfair. But now the deck is still able to do the same things. Setting up Chuchi, even just setting up Chuchi and Shenshen, at times with like a good follow-up can be enough because of how good of a card Shenshen and Chuchi are. But even then, you can go the route of Muddy Mud Dragon and Ultimate Azilkin to make a Dragoon. Or you can go the hand loop variant with Saber Gotems. There's just a lot of exploring that you can do with this deck, and I feel like for that reason, it's definitely still a tier 1 deck. If anything, it's like a kind of a hybrid combo control deck, because you're able to add in a lot of toolbox cards into your extra deck that allow you to break boards and also set up some pretty nasty boards yourself. So definitely do not sleep on this deck. Just because it lost for a VFD does not mean it lost that its playability. You can just switch the playstyle of the deck into sort of a more combo control style. Next up is Ultrageist. I feel like Ultrageist, personally for me, are just always like a tier 2 deck. Like the cards they have a lot of inevitability, which means if the game drags long enough, they're probably always gonna win in that very, very long game because of how good their resource game is. But the problem with the deck is just setting up, in my opinion. If you don't get time to set up your board with all your traps and your multi-faker loops and your Hextias and stuff, it's just gonna be a big problem for you. You're not gonna be able to keep up with the other decks. So I would say if the format becomes very, very, very slow, like for some reason all the combo decks and Dragoon just somehow leave the format, then maybe I could see it becoming really, really good. But other than that, I just feel like it's just a tier 2 deck. It's decent, but not super great. Next up, Sky Strikers. I say it's definitely a rogue deck. Sky Strikers, nothing really changed for them, but I just feel like they just don't do anything super well anymore. Like with Ultrageist, I guess playing the very, very long game, they might have a chance of beating you, but just getting set up to that point is just really, really difficult. Next up is Inferno Blights. This actually fell off the meta a little bit. Surprisingly, I was quite surprised because I feel like the deck was still decent. I mean, it could make VFD, but even without VFD, it could end on cards like Herald. It could end on cards like Herald of Arclight, plus Charles with a pop, stuff like that. And of course, like, it just has some really, really good. It has access to the warrior support cards, and warriors are one of the best archetypes in the game. For that reason, we'll put it in tier 1.5 at near the very bottom. It still has access to a card like Auroradon and Halqifibrax, which might become like the next big thing. Who knows? But in my opinion, for now, it's like a low tier 1.5 deck. It's pretty decent, I would say. But now that I can't make VFD, I wonder what it's really gonna go for other than Charles and Herald of Arclight. Potentially, they're able to play a card like Dragoon if they choose to play Anaconda their extra deck. They definitely can. So for that reason, I just think this could be a really, really good deck. And then next up, probably the biggest change, in my opinion, was Dragon Link going to like the forefront of the meta. Probably the best deck in this meta, in my opinion. I just think that the fact that they can combo through break through combo boards, they can break through control boards, they can set up nasty boards themselves, having access to unfair cards like Sanafon, the Sky Prison, it just completely locks out an entire part of your opponent's gameplay. Not only, speaking of that, they also have access to a combo with a card like DMZ Dragon and Dragon Buster Destruction Sword. So for those of you who don't know, you can, if you have access to Dragon Buster Destruction Sword, i.e. through like something like LP, you're able to summon DMZ Dragon as well. And the DMZ Dragon allows you to equip one Dragon Monster to another Dragon Monster you control. So you can equip your Dragon Buster Destruction Sword to your Boarload Savage Dragon or something, pretty much setting up the Buster lock once again. And that is the very, very unfair card. Konami, I don't think they realized what Buster could really do. Because even without Union Carrier, you're still able to do that same combo, which is just a really, really, really unfair combo in my opinion. Of course, it's not perfect. It's still probably a little susceptible to hand traps, but the amount of extenders this deck can play just allow it to play through all those hand traps to begin with. So for that reason, I think it's definitely a tier 1 deck, if not the best deck of the format. I guess we'll have to see though. This is my opinion of what's going to be like the top 4 decks. So Eldish, Dryden, Dragon Link, and maybe a little bit of Virtual Worlds too, with a lot of these decks following close behind. I went off a bit on a tangent, but Phantom Knights next, I think they're like a low tier 1.5 deck. They have access to some really, really good cards. A lot of their cards are just super powerful. They're able to play hand traps. They're able to use Dragoon very, very well, which I think for that reason kind of helps them reach that tier 1.5 mark. There's not much more I have to say about that. Next up is Pendulums. I think they're decent. They're not like broken by any means, in my opinion. They've always just been a decent deck until Electromite comes back. I would say they're just pretty much stuck in tier 2. Next up, Salamangreat. Same thing as Pendulums, kind of. They're always a decent deck. By no means is it like a bad deck, but your deck just doesn't have enough power to compete with some of the other decks. But the reason Salamangreat specifically I feel like can compete is because it has access to all the powerful Cyber support. Like, if you look at some of the generic Cyber's extra deck monsters, you'll see what I mean. You can play cards like Update Jammer, allowing your Access Go Talker to attack twice, which is just insane. You can play Transco Talker, play Splash Mage, pretty much turning your Splash Mage, so any 2 monsters in your deck becomes like an Access Go Talker, which is with like multiple pops, which is just absolutely insane. But even then, it's a decent control deck otherwise. Goki is interesting. The reason I put Goki in here is because of Firewall coming back, not because you're able to do some crazy combo with like Firewall summoning multiple times from your hand, but rather Firewall as a generic disruption card is really, really, really good. For those of you who may have forgotten, Firewall allows you to bounce up to the number of monsters on the field and graveyards, up to the number of Colinks that it has, and the Goki deck was very, very good at setting up Colink arrows with Appaloosa and Bardiche. Because the regular combo gets you to Appaloosa, and they use the Codebreaker Virus engine, which, if you haven't already checked it out, there's a video on my channel discussing that engine. And I think it's a good point to say, if you like the content you've been seeing so far, be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, because it really helps keep me motivated to keep posting more videos like this. But anyways, going back to this, it's also very good. Like Inferno Blights, has access to the warrior support cards like Neo Space Connector, Isolde. So those are probably some of the best monsters in the game right now. So for that reason, I feel like it's high tier 2. It can play cards like Dragoon in its deck, which is very, very huge. It can play cards like Rusty in its deck, and Appaloosa. So you can take the best of a couple of worlds, mash them together, and you get Gokis. But the big problem with Gokis, I feel like, is it's just kind of limited to putting up all its disruption through Link monsters. And if you think about how many disruptive Link monsters there are, there's Appaloosa, IP Masquerena going into something like Underworld Goddess or Unicorn, there's Verte Anaconda, and then there's Firewall Dragon and Rusty Bardiche, I guess. So those are probably going to be their only disruptions you're able to put up, because you're not able to put up some like Synchros or something for now. But I still think it's a very, very decent deck. Next up is Madolches. Madolches, I just feel like are just too reliant on their 1-card starters. If you stop their 1-card starters, unless they have a really, really good hand, I would say it's difficult for them to actually play through anything. So I'm going to put them in Rogue / Other. They're definitely not terrible. Tiramisu is a really, really powerful card still. I really don't think that card's going to get power creeped anytime soon. That's just a really, really strong card. But other than that, there's not much more I have to say about that. It just lacks a little bit in going first prowess. Because going first, it doesn't do anything. It just sets up a bunch of monsters that are kind of annoying to kill. But other than that, I feel like they have like a singular trap card they can search, which I just feel like isn't enough. And finally, Paleozoic / totally awesome style decks with like Bahamut Shark. I also think this is just a rogue deck. Paleozoic, it's just, as a control deck, it just doesn't have the same kind of grind game as Eldish does, in my opinion. Toad is, while still a really good card, I really don't think the format is at a point where a singular negate is going to be enough against a lot of decks. I mean, sure, you can back it up with a bunch of your traps, and that might be enough, but that's the same argument you can make for any other trap deck. If you set up enough traps, yeah, you'll be able to beat all the other decks, but other than that, I just feel like there's just not much I can really say about this card. It just isn't that good, in my opinion, this deck. But that's going to do it for me, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I hope it wasn't too ranty. If you did, let me know what you think of the tier list in the comments below. If you like the video, leave a like, comment, subscribe, because it really helps keep me motivated to keep posting more videos like this. But with that being said, once again, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And just remember, I should have said this at the beginning, but just remember that this is my opinion and my opinion only. I can be completely wrong. You can completely disagree, which is okay. But this is just what I believe the meta is going to shape up to be. But with that being said, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys soon. Take care.